Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. The only context in which we could feel defeated by our karmas is if we have some unreal narrative about being human. We only can feel defeated by our karmas in relationship to some narrative we have that we're supposed to be a different way, or things are supposed to happen a different way. And you might want to think about what those narratives are, because we have many of them, multi-layers of those kind of narratives. We have narratives about how we're supposed to perform as a human and how easy or hard it is supposed to be to get over obstacles, or how we're supposed to approach obstacles, or how we're supposed to relate to our own karmas or psychology or whatever, depending on what culture we're in. There's many narratives about all that stuff, and they're different in different cultures. But certainly a lot of cultures have a narrative that somehow we're supposed to conquer everything. If we don't have a narrative of conquest, then we might have a narrative of just get over yourself, stop complaining. That might be another narrative. So if we feel down about something, then we're down about feeling down, because we're not just getting over ourselves or something like that, right? Get on with it. There's a funny comic. She's from Ireland, and she plays this role of an Irish therapist. And she'll say stuff. So I told you to go outside and enjoy the forest, and I told you to eat a good meal, and I told you to do this, and I told you to do that, and you're still depressed, so just get the fuck over yourself. That's like Irish therapy to her. So there's cultures that tell us stuff like that, right? And we also have weird narratives about spiritual life that are also based on those cultural narratives that we have, or family narratives that we have. That when we start doing spiritual practice, we're supposed to get it really quickly. We're supposed to accomplish really quickly. We're supposed to be great practitioners. We're supposed to have all signs of accomplishment within a very short period of time. And by short period of time, I mean a lifetime. Right? All of these things are impacting us, causing us to feel discouraged or defeated or depressed, because we just are what we are. We've got enough to feel bad about, but then we pile on top of ourselves, feeling bad about how we are because we're not fixing it somehow. So I want to say that one of the great courages of spiritual life is patience and fortitude. Those things are much harder for us than barreling ahead and trying to fix something or get over something or bust through something. It's much harder to just put our head down and be patient and have some fortitude and keep going without knowing when something's going to resolve or what's going to happen. Certainly those have been the harder courages that I've had to put into place. And then also, when we're really, really feeling badly, or things are just going badly, right, somehow, because there's also this sense of externalness where things can go badly, out of our control. That happens. If you have some feeling of devotion, this only works if you have some feeling of devotion for nature, for life, for your teacher, for deities, for whomever, anything, anyone. Something that devotion is the only feeling that creates real refuge, or allows us to enter into real refuge. Then when things are going extra badly, we can be like someone in a burning building, and we can get very, very low to the ground where there's some air left. In other words, we can crawl under all the things that are storming and find that place of devotion and simple being low, and we can rest there while the whole thing's raging above us and just wait until it passes. That takes a lot of courage too, because we don't have control over a lot of things. right? We don't have control over the timing of things. We don't have control over how long things are going to take to resolve. We don't have control over what the fruit of our practice is going to be at any particular moment. We don't have control over what other people are going to do, world events. I mean, the amount of things that we have control over is minuscule compared to what we don't have control over. And sometimes when things are exceptionally difficult, the best thing we can do is duck and cover and wait until the thing just passes, because everything's a part of impermanence, absolutely everything. So sometimes we can just get down into our place of devotion and refuge and just rest there until it all moves on. Since I know you're also studying Jyotish, we have different periods and they can be quite long, what we call dasha. And some of the periods are really difficult. And we don't always have to face everything head on. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we're going to be bold in that more conventional sense. But that's not always the best strategy, because we can be as bold as all get out. But if the moment doesn't call for boldness, we're going to fall flat on our faces, right? We're just going to be getting nowhere fast with our boldness if the moment doesn't call for boldness, or if events are just too out of our control. Doesn't matter how bold we are, events are like, whatever, what are they doing? Okay, ignore them. Nothing to do with this, right? We can also kind of look at those periods, and when things get really tough, it might be a duck and cover moment. To think about that boldness is not the only form of courage, and boldness is not always what's called for. Sometimes, but not always.
Speaking of devotion, could you just talk a little about the Bhakti path?
Well, the Bhakti path is two different things. One thing it is a spiritual movement in India called Bhakti. I can't really remember what the dates are, but it was centuries ago. And it was another one of these movements, much like some of the movements in Christian traditions, where a spiritually and culturally disenfranchised class of people wanted to have a more direct relationship with the divine. There have been many movements like that in Christianity, and different sects of Christianity that have gotten started because of that, because there was some priestly class or whatever that was saying, only we can have access to the divine, and only we can do these rituals, and only we can talk to God, and you have to talk to us first if you want to talk to God, like the hand of God, right? There have been many times in human history when people have diverged from that and protested that and come up with ways of practicing that were more direct, that didn't require the intercession of some elite class of people. So the Bhakti movement is that in India, and it's still going strong today. And it was for a good swath of people from the West, their first introduction into an India-based spiritual tradition. And it has to do with having a much more direct relationship to God and the sense of intimacy with God. So that's one way that we could talk about Bhakti. The other thing is to understand that Bhakti just means devotion. And it doesn't really matter what kind of tradition you're in, whether it's from India or elsewhere, or whether it preaches devotion or rationality, or whether it has deities or it doesn't have deities. None of that actually matters when we are talking about someone who is actually going to enter into more deeper levels of spiritual realization, or just realization. Because there's no spiritual realization or mundane realization. I mean, it's just the same thing. The fact is that devotion is part of the fundamental expression of this reality. It's built into existence. It's not owned by a particular person. And it really doesn't matter where you start on the spiritual spectrum. If you go far enough, you are going to end up feeling great devotion, feeling great bhakti. It is absolutely inevitable and unavoidable. When I first started practicing, I didn't think I had that much devotion. I wasn't attracted to that word. My teachers didn't talk about it very much, and it wasn't a big deal because A lot of times in these kind of traditions that I've practiced in, the emphasis is just elsewhere. However, when I started having more realization, I just started feeling more and more devotion. I started experiencing that more and more, and eventually, through various things that happened, I just recognized that it really was this aspect of reality that was very, very central to any experience of human awakening, or maybe animal awakening too, I don't know. So in one sense, we all will become great devotees if we go far enough on a spiritual path. And when this started happening to me, it was very funny. First of all, like one of the earliest things I remember is just being terribly happy when anyone was practicing in any spiritual tradition. I didn't care what it was. I was just so happy to see anyone being devoted. It just made me feel really joyful to see that. And I remember, like, I would walk by a church and people were singing, or people were just going to church, not even doing anything, and I would just stand there like, you know. But eventually the devotional part just becomes so all present. I asked my teachers about it, and at one point I was living with this Tibetan couple, and they had an uncle who was a lama. And particularly in the Tibetan traditions I studied, no one talked about devotion very much. And I asked my friend, what's up with devotion in your tradition, her tradition of Tibetan Buddhism? Why doesn't anyone talk about it? And she said, I don't know, I'm going to ask my guru, my uncle guru, they call him. And she did. He was in Sikkim or something. I guess they texted. I don't really know how they communicated this, but what he said was, oh, we do talk about devotion, but only in private. I said, why? And she said, I don't know. But that was the end of the conversation. So because of the experiences that I've had as a practitioner, even though my teachers didn't tend to emphasize devotion, I emphasize it. And I tend to teach from the more devotional texts of Trika Shaivism. Has some absolutely beautiful devotional texts, poetry and hymns. And there is a lot of discourse about devotion in the tradition. It's just because of the way that this tradition entered into the West, which was mainly through academia, where the teachings on devotion, the tradition, have not been emphasized. I didn't really know they were there until I specifically looked for them. And now I just find them everywhere, especially in the earlier scriptures and texts from the tradition. You find more explicit things about devotion.
In past satsangs and teachings, you've talked about how the act of giving, it's about how good it feels to be generous, and that is built into everything. It seems like that idea could also be very self-centered. Like, oh, I'm giving because it feels so good to me.
When we're talking about this particular tradition, Dzogchen and Trika, we're talking about that we are divesting ourselves of all contrivances, all concepts, all constraints, and we are simply being as the natural state, in a state of utter naturalness and spontaneity. This is the meaning of sahaja, naturalness. It's at the heart of these traditions, to just be in a natural condition, unconstrained and unconstructed, without such ideas as something has to have a reason. So the whole construction, I'm doing this because, that's a contrivance that doesn't exist when we're being more relaxed and being more in line with what's happening in existence as it's in its more natural condition. There's a word in Sanskrit which escapes me right now, but it's used particularly in the Trika tradition, and it means outpouring. And it's used to describe the condition of Lord Shiva, or all of reality, as being an outpouring. What is being outpoured? Well, all worlds, all beings, and all circumstances. Just that. This outpouring is happening. It has a fountain-like quality. And it's happening because that's what this reality does. There's no other reason for it. It's not because it feels good, although it does feel good. It's not because it's generous, although it feels generous to us. It has no reason other than that's what this reality does. The outpouring is the actual life of this alive, aware reality. It's its most essential activity, right, at this outpouring. And when we are being more in the condition of sahaja, naturalness, utter naturalness, we are also outpouring. Not because we're trying to do it, not because it's good, not because it's ethical or virtuous or moral, not because it feels good, simply because when we relax all our contrivances and concepts, that's what we do. That's what happens when our essence nature stands revealed. You know, when we're engaged in life, so don't have to be in a spiritual tradition, just regular life, or when we're involved in a tradition, we ask these kinds of questions, like what's the good thing? What's the ethical thing to do? What's the right thing to do? How can I be more compassionate? How can I be more generous? What are my reasons for doing this? We have all these kinds of ways of talking about it. None of them are, it just feels good. And this is something that requires a shift in perspective, to shift away from we're doing it because it's good or because it's something else. And I often underline that it feels good, first of all, because that was just a surprise discovery for me. You know, that as I relaxed more and more giving was happening, that it was just so fulfilling. I would say it was fulfilling. But I'm not doing it because it's fulfilling. It just is fulfilling. You understand the difference? It basically is the result, this fountain-like outpouring, or as Abhinavagupta put it elsewhere, being all for others, is not the result of an ethical system, a moral system, or an idea of virtuousness or what's right or good. It's what you do when everything else has fallen away, all of your constructs about how you're supposed to be and what life is supposed to be like. When those things have fallen away and you're just being relaxed in a state of spontaneity and naturalness, that's what happens. When we're caught up in a lot of concepts and we're sort of pre-thinking our giving, we're giving through a lens of our karmas. For instance, fountain-like giving isn't giving the same to everyone. We give according to what we think someone else would benefit from, ideally, right? And we can have good discernment about that. If we're really focused on what someone else might benefit from, we're going to be thinking about what to give them through that lens. I'm sure we've all had this experience where someone gives us a birthday present or a present on some other time of year when presents are given, and we know it's for them, it's what they like. They haven't even given a moment's thought to what we might like, right? That's a kind of giving that is stupid giving, we could say. But if we're just using our ordinary care for other people, then we're thinking, what would another person really want or really like or really benefit from? So that's sort of very good ordinary giving. So we can be doing that and thinking about it. But when we're in more of a state of spontaneity, we don't need to have that pre-thinking. Everything is just kind of being perceived and being responded to in a more appropriate way. That's where we're headed. So you might have very poor giving, which would be based on a very limited sense of oneself and more based on one's own needs than somebody else's. And this is where we get into, I'm so giving, I'm so yeah. I was watching this video. Sometimes, you know, there's sort of spiritual doom scrolling. So there's this guy who's walking from Washington State or the Canadian border to Los Angeles. And he's got all this overlay of stuff about being simple and natural. And he's got all these stories about himself. And he obviously is positioning himself as some kind of spiritual teacher as he's walking along the road. And if you listen to him, everything's about him. Really, how he's experiencing it, how he's benefiting, how he's enjoying this, how he's doing this, how he's doing the other, what I do every day, what I eat, what I, you know. And this is the hallmark of the outpouring not really happening. Because if you're really outpouring, you're not that interested in all these little things about yourself. Or if you share something, like I share things about myself, but it's more so you guys can feel relieved of some constraint that you have. So we can have that kind of thing, and it might even sound like spiritual something or other, but if it's too much about oneself and self-defining and sort of grooming everyone what to think about you, which goes on a lot, that's not really an outpouring. And then there's, again, just ordinary caring about other people and really thinking about them and thinking about their specificity and wanting to do right by other people. And that's a beautiful thing. No spiritual practice needed. And then there's that more spontaneous thing that happens when you're relaxed in this more dramatic way. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.